Nations are reminded that statements in the general debate should not exceed 5 minutes. In order to hear from all inscribed speakers today, and to make sure that we complete our preset program, the microphone will be cut off after 5 minutes. Speakers with longer statements are encouraged to submit the full length of their statements to estatements@un.org for posting on the Journal of the United Nations. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Angola.
Distinguished co-chairs, excellencies, distinguished delegates, we commend the French Republic and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for their leadership and commitment in convening this high-level international conference. Angola aligns itself with a statement delivered by Uganda on behalf of the G77 on behalf of non-allied movements. Mr. Chair, the 37th Ordinary Session of the Assembly of the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, on 17 to 18 February 2024, called for the establishment of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine with an internationally recognized borders. We got here today with a sense of urgency to advance the implementation of the United Nations resolution pertaining to the question of Palestine and the two-state solution aiming to achieve just, lasting, and comprehensive peace in the Middle East. In these regards, Angola supports the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, based on peaceful coexistence and respect for United Nations resolution living side by side in peace and security. Angola repudiates any attempt to displace the Palestinian people from their territories, the continued policy of expanded settlements, and the illegal occupation and annexation of territories belonging to the Palestine. We have been following the alarming report warning about the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, where the risk of famine is increasing daily and the entire community are on the brink of collapse. In this context, Angola is deeply concerned about the implication of the conflict in Gaza for the region and continuation of illegal occupation. We express deep concern about the current humanitarian situation in Gaza as well, which has been rapidly deteriorating following the resumption of hostility in May, causing countless civilians' deaths. Angola rejects any attempt to use humanitarian assistance, particularly food, as weapon of war, and calls on the lifting of any measures that obstruct necessary humanitarian aid, undermining fundamental human rights, including the rights to life, health, food, water, and sanitation, and increases tension in the region. Mr. Co-Chairs, this conflict must come to an end. The immediate implementation of the ceasefire cannot wait any longer. Full and unlimited humanitarian assistance must be provided. All hostages must be released unconditionally. The time has come for our collective action for the benefit of those in Gaza who see this organization as their last hope for peace and stability. In this context, Angola expresses its support for the ongoing diplomatic effort led by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar to bring the parties back to the implementing the ceasefire agreements as outlined in the Security Council Resolution 2735 adopted in 2024. We therefore urge the parties to act in good faith in fulfillment their obligation to implement the resolution adopted by the Security Council. We also urge the parties to show maximum flexibility to quickly reach an understanding that can lead to the implementation of the agreed ceasefire. We believe that this is the ideal path toward achieving lasting peace in the Gaza and preserving peace and security in the Middle East. The Republic of Angola reaffirms the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, including the rights to have an independent state, and calls on the Security Council to admit Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. We believe that the two-state solution is the only viable option to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and provides the basis for the existence of the states of Israel and Palestine living together side by side in peace and harmony. In this regard, Angola rejects all attempts to destroy the two-state solution and reaffirms its commitment to promoting a just, lasting, comprehensive, and peaceful solution to the question of Palestine in all its aspects. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Angola. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me start by thanking the co-chairs, France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, for convening this high-level conference on the implementation of a two-state solution. A solution that at the moment seems distant, but that nevertheless remains the only viable solution, and, in the tragedy we are in, the only beacon of hope. A hope that we need to reinforce for all the civilians in Gaza, whose suffering continues to reach new depths, for the families in the West Bank, displaced and terrorized by new settlements and daily settler violence, and for the Israeli hostages held in cruel captivity by Hamas now for over 660 days, for the Palestinian and Israeli populations alike. However, in a conflict that has lasted more than half a century, this solution runs deep. Installing hope requires action. First and foremost, the war in Gaza needs to stop. We reiterate our call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire and for the unconditional release of all hostages. The situation in Gaza is unprecedented in its inhumanity. Israel must immediately change course. We welcome any effort to alleviate the suffering, and Israel must lift all restrictions to allow for the provision of safe, dignified, and unhindered humanitarian access in line with its obligations under international humanitarian law. We continue to support UNRWA, which remains essential until a two-state solution is realized. Secondly, de-escalating settler violence and displacement in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, must be stopped. The E1 settlement plan announced recently by Israel will, if implemented, divide a Palestinian state in two and thereby once again seek to undermine a two-state solution. We cannot let this happen. Together with the European Union, we have on numerous occasions expressed our strong rejection of the illegal Israeli settlements, and we have called on Israel to take action to prevent such violence and hold the perpetrators accountable. For the two-state solution to be realized, there can be no forced displacement of the population or unilateral attempts to change the territory and demography of the occupied Palestinian territory. This constitutes a clear violation of international law. Thirdly, the reconstruction of Gaza will be an enormous task for the international community, which we need to prepare for. It will require a coordinated effort with the Palestinian Authority in a leading role. We welcome the recent plan presented by the Arab Group for early recovery, reconstruction, and development of Gaza as a good basis to discuss next steps for Gaza. Denmark will be ready to contribute with substantial funding to early recovery and reconstruction efforts as soon as the situation on the ground permits, and we urge others to do the same. Finally, we need to see a return of the Palestinian Authority to Gaza, with the whole of Palestine unified under one political leadership. We reiterate that Hamas can have no future role in governing Gaza. We also commend the authority for renouncing Hamas and the October 7 terrorist attacks, and for embarking on the necessary reform agenda. To advance a two-state solution, Denmark has maintained a consistent and committed engagement with the Palestinian Authority since its establishment. reform, and capacity building of the Palestinian Authority is a necessary condition along the path to a credible Palestinian state and key to a two-state solution. Only a reformed, stable, and capable Palestinian governance structure can help ensure a renewed political process that in time will address the fundamental aspects of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We stand ready to continue our support to the authority, including in order to pave the way for new elections. We oppose Israel's continued withholding of over $2 billion in clearance revenues with a devastating effect on the Palestinian economy. In conclusion, Denmark reiterates its steadfast commitment to the realization of the two-state solution. Israelis and Palestinians deserve a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. At this critical juncture, and through this conference, we must do everything in our power to support that. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Denmark. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sudan.
In
the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, we express our appreciation to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Republic of France, and we thank them for holding this important conference to arrive at a peaceful resolution to the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. This conference is taking place at a dangerous historic crossroads where the Middle East is facing constant tensions and escalation in a manner that threatens peace and stability in the region. This requires quick action and with a sense of responsibility and adherence to international law to deal with the situation in a manner that would put an end to violence, war, and instability. For the past 2 years, the destructive war on the Gaza Strip has been killing thousands of civilians and displacing them, and the humanitarian situation is beyond catastrophic, and the destruction is unprecedented. The number of those killed and martyred has exceeded 59,000, most of whom were women and children, not to mention the thousands of the wounded and millions of displaced. The time has come to put an end to this humanitarian catastrophe and to arrive at a political solution through negotiations that would lead to the establishment of an independent and sovereign Palestinian state in the 1967 borders. This international conference is a historic opportunity that must not be wasted so that we could transform this widespread international support for the two-state solution into a tangible reality through specific measures and with specific timelines and with sincere and tangible international support. This conference must be a turning point that goes beyond simply making statements and expressing empathy. Rather, it must become or must turn into actual steps that would lead to a ceasefire in Gaza and put an end to the humanitarian crisis and enable the Palestinian people to establish their independent state and exercise their right to self-determination so that people in the region and future generations can live in peace and security. We value the efforts of Qatar, Egypt, and the United States to arrive at a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. And for the right foundations to be available to this conference, we note the previous resolutions issued by the General Assembly and on the question of Palestine, the widespread international consensus on the two-state solution and the Global Alliance for the two-state solution, the ICJ's advisory opinion on the legal effect of the Israeli practices in the occupied Palestinian territories. And based on the above, we hope that this conference would arrive at practical outcomes, including the full recognition of the State of Palestine and granting it full membership in the United Nations. And here we welcome the declarations by several countries of their recognition of the State of Palestine. Put an end to settlements and taking actual steps, practical steps towards settlement activity and withdrawal from Gaza. Put a ceasefire or immediate ceasefire in Gaza and opening the border crosses so that humanitarian aid can be accessed, the right of return to the refugees, Palestinian refugees, and guarantee the safety and protection of civilians, implementing the ICJ's advisory opinion, providing financial and political support to the Arab Islamic plan on the reconstruction of Gaza, and finally, defending and supporting UNRWA so that it can perform its tasks and refusing any harm to its mandate. I thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the distinguished representative of Sudan, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste.
Mr. President, Excellencies, first, I thank France and Saudi Arabia for convening this conference. The path to peace between Israelis and Palestinians does not lie in declarations made from afar. It lies with those who bear the weight of this conflict daily, the Israeli and Palestinian people. Only they can craft a future rooted in dignity, coexistence, and mutual recognition. However, they cannot do it alone. Our collective responsibility is to accompany them with courage, clarity, and consistency. Mr. President, this conflict is not a question of ideology alone, but a human tragedy. Generations of both peoples have endured trauma, loss, and fear. The Jewish people, scarred by centuries of persecution and the unfathomable horror of Holocaust, built a homeland in Israel. Palestinians, displaced and stateless for decades, continue to struggle for a nation where they can live with freedom, safety, and self-determination. These narratives are not irreconcilable. They are parallel truths that can and must form the foundation for a just and lasting peace. The two-state solution remains the only viable path forward, enshrined in international law, grounded in UN resolutions, including Resolution 181, and reaffirmed by global consensus. However, aspirations must now become action. Timor-Leste firmly condemns the October 7 attacks by Hamas, a brutal and inexcusable act of terror against civilians. No cause can justify the deliberate target of innocents. Equally, we must denounce the disproportionate military responses that have devastated entire communities in Gaza. The laws of war are not optional. Civilians must never be collateral. Hospitals, homes, and schools are not legitimate targets. Collective punishment is not security. It is a moral failure. Mr. President, we echo the voice of conscience around the world, the moderate voice both in Palestine and in Israel. The suffering in Gaza must end. Humanitarian access must be guaranteed. Hostages taken must be returned safely. Lives be protected, and hope must be restored. In this spirit, as a peace-loving nation, Timor-Leste proposes the following steps. First, an immediate and unconditional ceasefire to stop further bloodshed and allow urgent humanitarian relief. Second, the safe release and return of all hostages. This is a vital measure to rebuild trust. Third, deployment of an international civilian protection presence grounded in the Geneva Conventions to safeguard vulnerable communities. Fourth, a UN-led peace conference with participation from Israel and unified Palestinian leadership, the Arab League, the EU, BRICS, and other peace-loving nations to address final status issues. Fifth, long-term coordinated international support to rebuild Palestinian institutions and ensure a credible, unified leadership committed to peace. We believe that a unified, democratic, and legitimate Palestinian leadership can and will deliver peace. At the same time, we, as members of the United Nations, must recognize that military dominance will never guarantee true security. Real peace comes from recognition, not repression, compromise, or coercion. Timor-Leste aligns with the position of the Arab League, BRICS, and other peace-loving nations in supporting the establishment of a Palestinian state and a just solution for refugees as per international law. We also welcome the Arab Peace Initiative and believe that recent democratic efforts such as the Abraham Accords show that dialogue between former adversaries is possible. As President José Ramos Horta of Timor-Leste reminds us, the Jewish people rising from the ashes of genocide sought sanctuary in their state. Palestinians, long displaced, deserve the same. Let us amplify the voice of moderation and reason of both sides. They exist and must not stand alone. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mozambique.
Distinguished co-chairs, we thank the co-facilitators, France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, for their exemplary leadership, and to the 8 thematic groups for their diligent and invaluable work in preparing this historic gathering. Mozambique fully aligns itself with the statement delivered by Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement and wishes to highlight few key points in our national capacities. Co-chairs, as we convene over these 3 pivotal days, the eyes of the world are upon us. There is a profound expectation rooted in justice and human dignity that we will shoulder our collective responsibility and deliver tangible, meaningful outcomes. This conference echoes events from nearly 78 years ago, when the Security Council endorsed the vision of a two-state solution in 1947, a decision intended to mark an enduring step toward the Palestinian people's inalienable right to self-determination, freedom, peace, and justice. Palestine, recognized by over 140 countries, continues to await for the full realization of its right to self-determination as a sovereign nation. Mozambique was one of the first states to recognize the state of Palestine in 1988 and stood firmly by its decision. We therefore welcome the announcement by France and the United Kingdom of the decision to recognize the state of Palestine. The Palestinian people continue to endure immense suffering, humiliating military occupation, starvation used as a weapon, obstruction of humanitarian aid, the deliberate targeting of civilians, including children, and the destruction of vital civilian infrastructure. The United Nations legal framework provides clear parameters for achieving peace, from the General Assembly and Security Council resolution to the International Court of Justice rulings. The international community has consistently reaffirmed the legal principles regarding the situation, governing the situation in the Palestinian territories as the illegality of Israel actions. Co-chairs, Mozambique firmly recalls that violence, unilateral measures, and the systematic use of force only deepens the crisis and exacerbate its far-reaching consequences. We unequivocally condemn all acts of violence, whether by Hamas or by Israel. Mozambique reaffirms its principled position. A viable, lasting peace can only be achieved through the peaceful settlement of disputes and the realization of the two-state solution. To advance this vision from rhetoric to reality, we call for the immediate implementation of the following urgent measures. First, an immediate and unconditional ceasefire to create the necessary space for meaningful dialogue and humanitarian action. The immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and arbitrarily detained persons, ensuring their safe return to their families. The unimpeded and protected delivery of humanitarian assistance to all civilians in need. The full admission of Palestine as a member state of the United Nations. Co-chairs, Mozambique supports all genuine peace efforts and initiatives aimed at a peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine, particularly those led by Qatar, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United States, the League of Arab states and the Organization of Islamic Organization. The time for half measures and empty promises is over. The Palestinian people deserve justice, dignity, and sovereign state. The Israeli people deserve security and peace. And finally, the international community now faces both a responsibility and a unique opportunity to act with resolve. Let us translate the collective commitment expressed during this conference into meaningful action. And finally, make the long overdue two-state solution a reality. I thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mozambique, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Distinguished co-chairs of the conference, dear colleagues and friends, at the outset, allow me to congratulate France and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for organizing this conference. Bosnia and Herzegovina aligns itself with a statement delivered earlier by the European Union in line with our obligations stemming from the Stabilization and Association Agreement we have signed with the EU. Position of Bosnia and Herzegovina on the crisis of the Middle East is long-standing and principled for decades. Even since becoming UN member state in 1992. Diplomatic relations between Bosnia and Herzegovina and the State of Palestine were established in May 1992 within the succession framework, continuing its own right diplomatic practice of the former Yugoslavia in relation to the State of Palestine. The State of Palestine established and opened the embassy in Sarajevo more than 20 years ago, working on the promotion of peace and fostering all forms of cooperation between our two countries. We express support for all ongoing diplomatic efforts to end this brutal war. The ceasefire, as a first step, must be established immediately, unconditionally and permanently. Civilian casualties by means of shelling or starvation must stop. The accountability of all those responsible for terrorist acts and violations of international law, especially international humanitarian law, is prerequisite for moving forward. Accountability is not optional. Impunity must not be allowed. As a country that experienced the importance of lifeline that is humanitarian aid supplied by the United Nations to the cities and enclaves under siege 3 decades ago in my country, we deplore catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza and urge the State of Israel to allow delivery of humanitarian, especially medical aid and food supplies to all citizens of Gaza. There is no justification for this, none whatsoever. In this regard, we find the work of UNRWA, along with other UN agencies, indispensable as support for civilian population. We urge the unconditional release of all hostages on both sides, especially civilians, women and children, leading to a permanent end of hostilities. In this respect, the position of my country is principled and clear, and this is stipulated in Bosnia and Herzegovina's strategic documents. Only long-lasting solution is the one with 2 states, with the State of Palestine and State of Israel, full members of the United Nations, living side by side in peace, security, and mutual recognition. After the brutal aggression on war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, genocide in Srebrenica, and regardless of how many opened wounds remain, and we still do have, our message, and one message Dayton Peace Accord have taught us, is that peace is not everything. But without peace, nothing is possible. Having said so, in conclusion, I want to thank all of 19 co-chairs, led by France and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, for offering us comprehensive and action-oriented New York Declaration that is in front of us, that can serve as an initial roadmap for fulfilling our shared goals and objectives. We are looking forward to implementation of it. In this high time, to move us from wise words to concrete deeds, on a pathway from war and crimes to sustainable peace and dignity, dignity for all. I thank you for your attention, and distinguished co-chairs, I thank you again.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Mr. President, the Philippines joins other member states in thanking France and Saudi Arabia for their excellent leadership in laying the groundwork for this international conference aimed at further advancing global efforts for the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. The Philippines supports all efforts that will establish a definitive path towards resolving the Palestine issue peacefully and realizing the two-state solution, grounded in international law and in the UN General Assembly's established positions. Indeed, this enduring and complicated Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains a strategic piece in achieving a comprehensive and lasting peace in the Middle East. In this regard, the Philippines would like to reiterate the following. First, the Philippines firmly supports the two-state solution in accordance with international law and relevant UN resolutions. We believe that this remains the most viable and sustainable pathway to resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is essential to the realization of a lasting peace. This conflict will only end when Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in their own sovereign, independent states, in peace, dignity, harmony, and prosperity, and where their rights, aspirations, and security are recognized and upheld. Second, we also firmly support direct dialogue between Israel and Palestine and all stakeholders for the realization of the two-state solution. This conflict cannot be resolved through war or vicious cycles of violence. We urge all parties to restore a political horizon for the two-state solution and the peace and stability of the region through meaningful diplomatic dialogues and negotiations based on trust and mutual understanding. We support the intensification and acceleration of international and regional diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving, without delay, a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East. We therefore commend and support the efforts by Saudi Arabia, Norway, and the European Union for spearheading the Global Alliance for the implementation of a Palestinian state and a two-state solution. Third, we support a complete and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, the release of all hostages, and the provision of humanitarian assistance for those affected by the conflict. A permanent ceasefire will remove the significant security and political obstacles to delivering aid across Gaza and increase urgent life-saving humanitarian support. Fourth, we remain gravely concerned over the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, which has resulted in an alarming number of casualties, particularly women and children. In this regard, we call on all parties to adhere to their obligations under international law and international humanitarian law, with particular emphasis on the protection of civilians, especially women and children, and the facilitation of the rapid, unhindered, and safe humanitarian relief for all civilians in need in Gaza. Fifth, we firmly support the acceptance of Palestine as a member of the United Nations, a position that has been consistently supported by an overwhelming majority of the General Assembly. Toward this end, we support steps that would further expand Palestine's involvement in various UN processes that would eventually pave its full membership in this august body. Sixth, the Philippines affirms its readiness to form part of UN-led peacekeeping and/or humanitarian contingent in Gaza, contributing peacekeepers, teachers, and/or medical workers if authorized by the UN Security Council. The Philippines reiterates its enduring support and cooperation as we work together and commit to ending war, upholding justice, respecting human rights, promoting sustainable development, and maintaining international peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sweden.
Co-chairs, I am here today to reaffirm Sweden's commitment to peace, justice, and a two-state solution. The ongoing war, beginning with the horrific terrorist attacks by Hamas, has led to a level of suffering in Gaza that is hard to imagine. It is in the interest of all states to not only bring the current war to an end, but to ensure a sustainable two-state solution. I would therefore like to express Sweden's appreciation to France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for this conference. Sweden has consistently advocated for a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on international law and mutual recognition. We stand firm in our support of both states' right to freedom and security. Sweden recognized the State of Palestine in 2014. Our long-standing commitment to peace in the Middle East dates back to 1948 and the efforts of Swedish UN mediator Folke Bernadotte, who advocated for a peaceful and sustainable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and emphasized the importance of humanitarian efforts during wartime. This commitment lives on to this day. This conflict must not continue indefinitely. The two-state solution requires bold leadership and difficult compromises by both Israel and Palestine. Both parties must come to the negotiating table with a genuine commitment to peace, and the international community must be ready to support. Let me share a few specific examples of how the Swedish government provides concrete support to a two-state solution. Sweden remains the largest contributor to the EU police mission to Palestine and continues to support the EU border mission, key to capacity building in the security sector and to promoting rule of law. We have a well-established cooperation between our central bank and its Palestinian and Israeli counterparts, and Sweden has provided over $100 million in humanitarian support since the start of the war in Gaza, in addition to our long-term development cooperation in Palestine and our substantial core support to the UN agencies active there. We must also hold accountable those who undermine peace through violence or unilateral actions. Any steps towards territorial or demographic changes are unacceptable. Sweden calls for EU sanctions against extremist Israeli ministers who promote illegal settlement policies and counteract a future two-state solution. It is completely indefensible to block the distribution of humanitarian aid to civilians in need. Sweden demands that the Israeli government act immediately to alleviate the human suffering and allow unrestricted and sustained humanitarian access to all parts of Gaza at scale and in line with humanitarian principles and international humanitarian law. It is totally unacceptable that children are now starving to death in Gaza, while the aid workers who are there to help are being attacked. Let us not forget that starvation of civilians as a method of warfare constitutes a war crime. And we demand again and again that Hamas immediately and unconditionally release its hostages. We also firmly reiterate that Hamas cannot have a role in the future governance of Gaza. Let me be clear. The path to peace is neither quick nor easy, but it is a path necessary taking through irreversible steps. Today marks a new chapter of intensified efforts. We call on all parties to return to the negotiating table with courage, respect for international law, and a commitment to the dignity and human rights of Israelis and Palestinians alike. Sweden stands ready to support meaningful dialogue, to uphold the principles of justice, and to work with our partners in the international community to turn hope into reality. Thank you.
أشكر
I thank the distinguished representative of Sweden. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Montenegro.
Excellencies, at the outset, I would like to thank France and Saudi Arabia for their leadership in convening this important conference. We also commend the efforts of the United Nations and all mediators working tirelessly to alleviate the human suffering and advance the just and lasting peace in the Middle East. Montenegro strongly condemns the heinous terrorist attack carried out on October 7, 2023, and reiterates that targeting civilians is unacceptable under any circumstances. We remain deeply concerned by the scale of human suffering, particularly in Gaza, where civilians continue to bear the brunt of violence. We welcome the recent steps taken to improve humanitarian access and strongly encourage their continuation and expansion. Humanitarian assistance must reach all those in need safely and without delay. Mr. Chair, Montenegro has long supported a peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through the implementation of the two-state solution, in line with international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. As one of the countries that recognize the state of Palestine, our position remains rooted in the conviction that both the Palestinian and Israeli people have an equal and inherent right to live in peace, security, and dignity, each within a sovereign, independent state. We are deeply concerned by devastating humanitarian toll of the ongoing hostilities. The loss of innocent lives, particularly among children and civilians, is unacceptable. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire and enduring peace, the release of all hostages, and the protection of civilians in full accordance with international humanitarian law. Montenegro stands ready within its means and in partnership with others to support international efforts aimed at recovery, reconstruction, and institutional strengthening of Palestine. In this context, we also underscore the indispensable role of UNRWA and the broader UN system in addressing urgent humanitarian needs and supporting long-term development. Mr. Chair, let this conference serve not only as a reaffirmation of our shared principles, but as a concrete step towards prevailing peace. We must seize this moment to recommit ourselves to the two-state solution, not as a distant aspiration, but as a political imperative grounded in justice, mutual recognition, and the shared prosperity of all people in the region. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Montenegro. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Haiti.
Excellencies, co-chairs, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Republic of Haiti at this high-level international conference convened by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the French Republic on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. As early as March 17, 1949, Haiti was one of the first founding members of the United Nations to recognize the creation of the State of Israel shortly after its declaration of independence, thus affirming its commitment to the principles of law and international legitimacy. At the same time, and always faithful to Article 1, Paragraph 2 of the United Nations Charter, Haiti has consistently supported the right of peoples to self-determination and has, for several decades now, called for the legal recognition of a sovereign and viable Palestinian state. Thus, the Republic of Haiti and Palestine sealed their mutual commitment on September the 27th, 2013, through the signing of a joint communiqué establishing diplomatic relations at the embassy level in accordance with the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. This initiative demonstrates the will of both peoples to promote friendship, cooperation, and mutual respect based on the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and self-determination, which are guaranteed by the UN Charter. This diplomatic relationship, in place now for over a decade, is an important milestone in Haiti's solidarity with the just Palestinian cause. Co-chairs, today Haiti reaffirms its full and unwavering support for the creation of a Palestinian state in accordance with paragraph 2, line 2 of Resolution 7520, which calls on the international community to promote the effective exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, particularly its right to self-determination, and to mobilize all forms of assistance in its favor. It's also important to ensure that Palestinian children no longer continue to die of hunger. In accordance with Resolution A/Res/79/81 adopted on December 3, 2024, we emphasize the need for a comprehensive, just and lasting settlement of the question of Palestine. We urge the State of Israel and the State of Palestine to overcome the divisions of the past and to re-engage without delay in a genuine dialogue in order to jointly chart out a future of peaceful coexistence and shared prosperity. In conclusion, Haiti calls for a concerted effort on the part of the international community. Diplomats, regional organizations, and donors must work together to build trust, remove political, security, and humanitarian obstacles, and support a viable peace process. At this decisive moment, we hope to see this Assembly write a new page of history where justice and dignity prevail. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Haiti. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, co-chairs. Australia very much appreciates the leadership of the Republic of France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in co-chairing this conference. We acknowledge the efforts of the working group chairs towards achieving tangible progress towards a two-state solution. 77 years ago, the global community envisioned two states, the State of Israel and the State of Palestine. Australia shares the frustration of the great majority of countries that a Palestinian state still does not exist today. A two-state solution remains the only hope of breaking the endless cycle of violence, the only hope of a just and enduring peace for Israelis and Palestinians alike. On 29 July, Australia and 14 countries released the New York Call, which makes clear that recognition of a state of Palestine is an essential step to a two-state solution. The statement is upfront about the challenges we face, including with the terrorist group Hamas, which we condemn unequivocally and call upon to release all hostages immediately and unconditionally. The statement expresses our determination to work on an architecture for the day after to guarantee the disarmament of Hamas and its exclusion from Palestinian governance. And we acknowledge the support from the Arab League and other key countries in the region to end Hamas' grip on Gaza. Australia welcomes the important commitments made by the Palestinian Authority, condemning the 7 October terrorist attacks, calling for the liberation of hostages and the disarmament of Hamas, committing to terminate the prisoner payment system, committing to school reform, committing to calling elections within a year to trigger generational renewal, and accepting the principle of a demilitarized Palestinian state. These are significant steps that demonstrate the Palestinian Authority is seeking to play its part as a partner for peace. Australia will continue to support the Palestinian Authority as it pursues the path of reform, including through our capacity building and governance initiatives. Co-chairs, Australia is gravely concerned by actions of the Israeli government which are undermining the prospects of two states, including relentless settlement expansion and ongoing impunity for settlement violence. We call on Israel to engage on the question of Palestinian statehood. The world is moving, and a two-state solution is essential for Israel's long-term security. Co-chairs, Australia will keep working with other countries to make a two-state solution a reality, and we urge the whole international community to do the same. Co-chairs, we cannot forget that while we gather, a humanitarian catastrophe is taking place in Gaza. The situation has gone beyond the world's worst fears. Australia is a part of the international call on Israel to comply immediately with its obligations under international law, including removing restrictions on aid and allowing the United Nations and humanitarian actors to do their life-saving work. Israel's excuses and explanations are untenable and without credibility. We reaffirm our call for an immediate return to a ceasefire in Gaza, which offers the best hope of ending the suffering of Gazans and returning the hostages to their families. Australia is committed to a future where both the Israeli and Palestinian peoples can live in peace and safety within secure and internationally recognized borders. Until that day, every effort must be made here and now to safeguard innocent life and end the unacceptable suffering and starvation of the people of Gaza. Thank you.
أشكر الممثل الموقر.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Peace and blessings of God be upon you. Co-chairs, Excellencies, at the outset I would like to express the appreciation of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the French Republic for chairing this historic meeting, which reflects collective commitment to achieving a comprehensive, just and sustainable peace in the Middle East on the basis of the two-state solution. We share the international community's decades-long support of the vision of the two-state solution as the only way to resolve the conflict. Nevertheless, we also stress the need to implement and comply with relevant United Nations resolutions as they represent a political and legal commitment and an indispensable fundamental pillar for achieving peace and stability in the region. Israel is carrying out systemic crimes including aggression, genocide, destruction, displacement, starvation, and blockade on the Gaza Strip. This is in addition to its illegal policies of settlement expansion, annexation, and ethnic cleansing. Israel also plans to impose its so-called sovereignty over the West Bank, including the occupied city of Jerusalem, and targets Islamic and Christian holy sites, all of which constitute flagrant violations of international law and the relevant UN resolutions. In this regard, we call for an end to all such violations, the imposition of an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the provision of adequate and sustainable humanitarian assistance, the withdrawal of the Israeli occupation forces from the Gaza Strip, and the return of the proceeds of the Palestinian taxes illegally withheld by the Israeli occupation authorities. This release would enable the Palestinian government to meet its obligations throughout the Palestinian territory. We also emphasize the necessity of implementing the Arab Islamic Plan for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. Excellencies, we highly appreciate the positions of the countries that have recognized the State of Palestine, especially the announcements made by His Excellency President Emmanuel Macron of France and His Excellency Prime Minister of the United Kingdom Keir Starmer of their respective countries' intention to recognize the State of Palestine next September. This comes in affirmation of and in fundamental support for the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the establishment of their independent state. We urge all states that have not yet done so to fulfill their duty to recognize the State of Palestine and to support its full membership in the United Nations as a fundamental pillar for the protection of the two-state solution and the achievement of peace and stability in the region. We also reaffirm our commitment to support UNRWA, and we call for the provision of political support, sustainable funding, and legal protection for UNRWA. We stress the need for UNRWA to continue its vital and irreplaceable role. In conclusion, we affirm our readiness to work with all international partners to transform our goals and collective commitments into practical and irreversible steps. This is to embody justice and peace through the implementation of the two-state solutions. This must lead to an end to the illegal Israeli occupation and colonial settlement in occupied Palestinian territory. This must also enable the Palestinian people to exercise their inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination and the establishment of a sovereign state within the borders of the 4th of June 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital, as well as the right of return for refugees under the relevant UN resolutions, especially Resolution 194. Thank you for your kind attention.
أشكر الممثل الموقر لمنظمة التعاون الإسلامي.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and I'll give the floor to the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf.
In the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful, Your Excellencies, may the peace of God be upon you. At the outset, I would like to express our deep appreciation for the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, the King of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud, the Crown Prince and Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. May God protect them. We thank them for the initiative to establish the Global Alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution. The alliance is a strategic and wise vision that redirects the international community towards the core of the conflict, and it awakens in the global consciousness the historic justice and the basis of the legal settlement and the legitimacy of the question of Palestine. We also highly appreciate the French role led by His Excellency President Emmanuel Macron in the co-chairmanship of this conference and the adoption of His Excellency's genuine positions to lead towards a just solution of this question. Your Excellencies, the Gulf Cooperation Council, since its establishment in 1981, has maintained this central issue in the global conscience and has resisted the attempts to marginalize the Palestine question. And in 2002, the Council announced its full support of the Arab Peace Initiative that was presented by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as an integrated strategic vision for a just and lasting peace, to provide a viable formula for a potential peace starting by a Palestinian state on the borders of 1967. We are also proud to applaud the states that have recognized the State of Palestine, and I would like to here commend the courageous and historic decision of the French Republic and the United Kingdom that they intend to recognize the State of Palestine, and we would like to issue a genuine call from this podium, calling on the states that have not yet taken this step. We say that the continued lack of recognition of one of the conflict parties entrenches a structural imbalance in the peace process and deprives negotiations of any real substance. Your Excellencies, The Gulf Cooperation Council reiterates today its well-established positions that have been repeatedly declared as follows. First, our full support for the establishment of an independent Palestinian state as per UN resolutions and the Arab peace process. Second, our categorical rejection and condemnation of the continued Israeli aggression against Gaza and demanding its immediate cessation and providing effective protection for innocent civilians. Third, our categorical rejection of the settlement policies of Israel as a blatant violation of the international law. Fourth, we reiterate the role of UNRWA and allowing for humanitarian access and to start reconstruction in the Palestinian territory. Fifth, we reiterate our condemnation of all forms of attacks against innocent people around the world without regard of their religion or ethnicity or race. Justice is one and cannot be divided. Finally, I can only reiterate here that true greatness is not based on power, but on the ability to use power to serve justice. It is time to turn this principle into a clear international position that recognizes a fully and independent Palestinian state. May the peace of God be upon you. Thank you.
I thank the Distinguished Secretary General of the GCC, and I now give the floor to the Distinguished Representative of the Sovereign Order of Malta.
Distinguished co-chairs, excellencies, esteemed delegates. At the outset, our delegation wishes to thank the French Republic and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for convening this timely conference, alongside all other participants and stakeholders, at a time when collective dialogue is essential to uphold international humanitarian law and to alleviate the suffering of the most vulnerable. At this critical moment, the humanitarian dimension of efforts to achieve a peaceful and sustainable solution is a shared imperative for the international community. Beyond political deliberations, civilians across the affected territories face growing challenges, displacement, trauma, and barriers to essential aid. All stakeholders must reaffirm their obligations under international humanitarian law to ensure protection, unhindered access, and dignity for those most at risk. In cooperation with the Latin Patriarchate in Jerusalem and the Holy Family Parish in Gaza, the Order of Malta's humanitarian relief agency, Malteser International, has worked alongside international partners to deliver over 200 tons of food assistance to the population in Gaza City. We unreservedly condemn the terrorist acts of 7 October 2023 and the perpetrators, and call for the release of all hostages. Our prayers are certainly with the families who are suffering, being left in the limbo of the unknown. We can join others in calling for a cessation of all acts of violence that breach international law and humanitarian principles. Such acts only deepen human suffering and erode the trust needed for any sustainable peace. Protecting humanity must remain central to all collective efforts. Recent events have once again underscored the gravity of the situation. The Sovereign Order of Malta reiterates its view of the attack carried out on 17 July 2025 against the Catholic parish of the Holy Family in Gaza as wholly unacceptable. This assault, on a place of worship, a shelter, and a humanitarian hub, which resulted in the deaths of 3 civilians, injuries to 10 others, including the parish priest, and the displacement of over 600 people, many of them children and patients dependent on life support, stands as a stark reminder of the urgent need to uphold the protection of humanitarian facilities and corridors. Any attack on religious minorities being singled out for their faith is unjustified. In this context, the Order of Malta echoes the appeal of His Holiness Pope Leo for an immediate halt to the barbarity of the war. Beyond this tragedy, humanitarian actors continue to face wider systemic challenges. Financial strain, delivery delays, and complex administrative barriers affect territories under the Paris Protocol. These obstacles threaten life-saving operations from medical care to trauma recovery and psychosocial support for uprooted communities and vulnerable children. We urgently call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and for the unimpeded and sustained delivery of desperately needed humanitarian aid into Gaza. Humanitarian organizations must be granted access to provide assistance without obstruction under clear guarantees of safety and security, both for the affected civilian population and for the personnel delivering life-saving aid, in accordance with international law. The scale of human suffering has become unimaginable. The images we continue to witness daily of infants and children so severely malnourished that they appear skeletal, unable even to cry, are a stark indicator of desperate urgency. This must not be allowed to continue. Through our neutral mandate and long-standing commitment to relief and medical assistance, the Sovereign Order of Malta will continue to stand with all partners to protect humanitarian lifelines. Our duty is clear: to ensure that the most vulnerable are not forgotten as the world works towards a peaceful and sustainable solution. We remain committed to working with partners to help shape these effective solutions. As Pope Leo reminded us only days ago, every human being has an intrinsic dignity.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Sovereign Order of Malta. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies.
Thank you to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France for organizing this important conference. Much has been said on the unbearable situation being faced by the people in Palestine and on the challenges humanitarian actors are facing. Thus, we will try to be brief, highlighting the severity of a few points in case these are not yet abundantly clear. The humanitarian space to provide life-saving goods and services has been rendered almost non-existent. We have called since the beginning for an immediate, sustained, and unhindered flow of aid to be allowed into Gaza at the scale needed to meet the immense needs and in line with universally accepted international rules and principles. This has perhaps never been more urgent than now. Our Palestine Red Crescent Society colleagues in Gaza are receiving people fainting and sick due to hunger at their medical facilities, whilst they also cannot find food for themselves and their own children. Member states must ensure access for humanitarian assistance and protection of civilians, including humanitarian and medical personnel. The conditions and specific access challenges local humanitarian actors, such as PRCS, face must also be considered and addressed. It is them, local humanitarians often far from the limelight, that are sustaining what is left of the humanitarian response. PRCS continues to provide a wide array of critical services across Gaza, including ambulances and field hospitals, adapting to impossible operational conditions to maintain life-saving services and reach people wherever they are. Excellencies, we cannot accept any mechanism that does not allow humanitarian aid to be distributed in accordance with humanitarian principles. As we have seen, this strips human beings of their dignity, fails to respond to the level and complexity of needs, and creates drastic security risks, including people being killed and injured. PRCS ambulances and hospitals are having to deal with regular mass casualty events while patients report they were trying to access food at distribution sites. We call on member states to support long-standing and accepted modes of aid delivery specifically designed to meet humanitarian needs. and to protect the dignity and life of the population affected, while recognizing the role of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement and all of those impartially providing a life-saving response. We recognize the situation of the hostages, and of the medical and humanitarian personnel being deprived of liberty, and we call for respect for the life and dignity of all people affected. Lastly, despite its relentless efforts, PRCS is facing extreme and mounting challenges to its operations in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. Conditions and access restrictions in the West Bank severely impact the population and the humanitarian civility to reach people in need. Member states can and must ensure this conference leads to immediate action to also address the situation in the West Bank, to appropriately address the root causes, and to support and protect the population and the people like PRCS, those holding up the healthcare and humanitarian response. As we leave the room today, may we do so with a sense of urgency. May we remember that we stand in front of a humanitarian catastrophe, one that must be addressed now. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean.
Distinguished co-chairs, France and Saudi Arabia, thank you for convening this very important meeting as a part of unfinished business that the United Nations has. I have the honor to bring you the voice of a 35-member parliaments of the Euro-Mediterranean and Gulf region. The almost 80-year tragedy in the Middle East, this continued murder of innocent men and women and children must end. Enough is enough. PAM calls for immediate ceasefire, particularly for letting the humanitarian assistance, food and water to be delivered for the starving and beleaguered people of Gaza. 78 years ago, this House, this very assembly, approved the partition plan for the Middle East. Two states living side by side in peace and harmony. Unfortunately, that today is not the case. We have only one state, while the other is being denied statehood and membership. PAM calls for immediate statehood for the state of Palestine, full membership of the United Nations, and without conditions. No other state that became a part of this House came through conditionality. They deserve and they must be made full members. So the two nations of the Middle East could negotiate on the basis of parity and equity. Peace is possible only through dialogue, which even most fragile context is the best way forward if pursued with honesty of purpose and necessary political will. Securing lasting peace in the Middle East has been a priority for PAM since its inception. The very foundation of the Assembly, PAM, was shaped by the need for creating a space of trust where Israel and Palestine representatives could meet, along with their neighbors, and share their views. Both Israel and Palestine hold vice presidential positions in the bureau of our organization, PAM, and meet regularly. This is not just symbolic. It is a sense of our belief that more can be achieved through dialogue than through confrontation and war. PAM remains convinced that the pursuit of just, lasting, and comprehensive peace based on a two-state solution is the only viable path to resolve the conflict, ensure security for all, and enable genuine regional integration. PAM also strongly advocates for the release of all hostages, either side, wherever they are, the protection of civilians, and the unimpeded delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance. For more than 80 years, the conflict in the Middle East has cast a negative shadow across not only the Middle East, but well beyond. The consequences of peace in the Middle East will have positive ramifications throughout our interconnected world. Peace in the Middle East is good for everybody. PAM remains at the disposal of members, Israel and Palestine, and the international community, especially the UN Secretary General, to work towards achieving a permanent ceasefire and peace for all parties. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, and I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Pan-African Intergovernmental Agency for Water and Sanitation of Africa, for Africa.
First of all, I would like to thank France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for organizing this timely initiative. Honorable delegates, esteemed guests, we gather today to address the critical issue, the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and implementation of a two-state solution. This conference is a timely reminder of the international community's commitment to finding a just and lasting solution. The conflict has been a source of suffering, displacement, instability for decades. A two-state solution based on 1967 borders is the most viable path to peace, security, and self-determination for both the sides. We urge parties to resume negotiations and dialogues, address core issues, border settlements and refugees, implement confidence-building measures. The international community must support negotiations and mediation efforts, address settlement expansions and increasing violence, promote economic development and humanitarian assistance. A just and lasting peace requires mutual recognition and respect, security for both the parties. Let's work together to achieve a two-state solution, ensuring peace, dignity, and prosperity for all. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Pan-African Intergovernmental Agency for Water and Sanitation for Africa. We have thus heard the last speaker in the general debate. Excellencies and distinguished delegates, the conference has before it the outcome document of the conference entitled Peaceful Settlement of the Question of Palestine and Implementation of the Two-State Solution. We would like to inform you that this outcome document was circulated to all permanent missions yesterday via the e-delegate portal. And states have until the beginning of September to endorse the document if they so wish. The modalities on endorsement are reflected in the note verbal transmitted to all permanent missions. With the concurrence of the conference, the co-chairs would like to propose that this meeting be suspended until further notice. I hear no objection. The meeting is therefore suspended.
Thank you so much.